we need 20 years to prepare for peak oil. And the cost of preparing too early will be far overshadowed by the cost of preparing too late. So even if the optimists are right, even if global oil production isn't going to peak till 2035, we should be starting right now with the World War II level and scale of effort to prepare for it.
What I mostly wanted to talk about is what you think communities, what individuals can do, but also to augment that. How can we as a community go about waking up others, or should we put most of our focus on trying out alternatives or lobbying our government? I mean, sort of where do we start?
Well, I think we have to do many things at the same time, because there's a lot that individuals can't do for themselves that has to be done at the local community level. And there's a lot that local communities can't do that has to be done at the state and national level. And there's a lot that national governments can't do that has to be done through an international agreement, the Global Oil Depletion Protocol. Now, there are parts of that chain of responsibility that are not very functional. Particularly the national government here in the U.S. right now. There's not much sign of functionality in the political class in Washington. That said, I don't think we can afford to just give up on the national level, because there are some things that desperately need to be done that only they can do with regard to energy policy and foreign policy for that matter. I think we basically have to keep our attention on all of those levels at the same time. Now, from the standpoint of individuals, clearly there's a lot that we need to do to take an assessment of our individual lives, how much energy we're using, how dependent we are on fossil fuels, basically, and how we can reduce that dependency for transportation, for home heating, eating more locally, and so on. Then for communities, we have to look at where the vulnerabilities are for our municipal systems of water, wastewater, and also providing water. For local emergency services, police, fire, hospital, so on. And also for food. We need local food systems. Now, of course, the local municipalities are responsible for most of those things, but they don't control the food system. So at the community level, you have to be working, first of all, at the municipal level with local government, but then also have parallel organizations that are non-governmental. The government has to work with what it's responsible for, and then what it can't, what's not under its purview. Things like local economic systems, local currencies, relocalization of the economy, local food security. Those things have to be taken in hand by volunteer citizens' councils.
Well, and probably working with your business community as well.
Yeah.
I mean, and certainly your farming groups and so on. But I would hope that business could be an ally here if they're
Absolutely.
on board.
Well, yeah, things like farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, and then ultimately community-supported manufacturing. And then for transportation, again, there's only so much that the municipality is responsible for. There may be some local public transit, like local public bus or something like that, but that's certainly not going to be enough to help people get around. So again, local volunteer citizens councils are going to have to come up with other alternatives like community-supported hitchhiking and computer and cell phone organized ride-sharing programs.
You mentioned that earlier, the cell phone idea. Say a little bit more about that. That was a new idea for me, how that might work.
Right. Well, this is an idea that's being developed by an organization I work with called Community Service or Community Solutions. And it's really a pretty simple idea. It's just a matter of having drivers with cell phones and then connected by cell phone with an operator who's at a computer and with a computer program that keeps track of on a map where all of the drivers are at any given time. And what we're talking about is really kind of a bus service, but on a very small scale that makes it extremely flexible. The problem with buses is, you have these giant diesel emitting vehicles that that only run on certain routes, and that may or may not be where people want to go.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you have smaller vehicles that maybe only carry a dozen people, but they can vary their routes at a moment's notice, then you can provide for people's actual needs.
That reminds the notion that I had of like the shuttle bus services for people, for airport transporters, who take a bunch of people and they're dropped off in various places in town, in the urban areas. That same notion here could make a lot of sense. Nevada County, or at least around our towns, we think of it as a spider web of a lot of main feeder roads to different neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And I keep thinking of, there's a neighborhood feeder road vehicle that's on call various times during the day to do that kind of.
Right.
But the cell phone is a way of linking in.
Sure.
Sounds like a really perfect tool.
There's also the possibility of car sharing and car co-ops mediated by cell phone and computer, and a number of towns already have those. Vancouver, BC, San Francisco. And there's no reason it couldn't work in smaller communities.
So
as
in
well.
a co-op, a number of people get together and buy a vehicle and just share it.
Well,
how does it work?
First you set up the co-op, and then the co-op is responsible for buying and maintaining the vehicles. And then they're stationed at various strategic points around the geographical area serviced by the co-op. And then if you want to borrow the car, use the car at any given time, then you call up ahead of time or go online and reserve the car. And usually it's only within a couple of blocks of where you live.
That's nice in the urban areas. That wouldn't be as true for parts of our county. Yeah. In a sense, all this feels like it could daunting because there's so many levels being needed to happen for that security at the same time. How much? I don't know, in the transition, the short-term transition, as our oil and natural gas are declining, I know a lot of people are putting hope in hydrogen fuel cells, in things like biodiesel and ethanol. I mean, and I realize that none of those have the energy return. Of course, there's all kinds of hazards with hydrogen, and not to speak of the infrastructure. Aren't we going to need those, though, for some of just transitional to do some part of?
We'll need them mostly for emergency vehicles. We have to rely primarily on reducing demand. There's no question about it, because we simply don't have enough time to respond with a supply-side solution. Unless peak oil is, literally 40 or 50 years from now, there's really not time to continue with anything like our current infrastructure of energy usage and then just run that with a different kind of supply system. So we will have to rely primarily on reduction in demand, and then for emergency purposes, and then if we are able to do just the transportation that we need with car sharing, car co-ops, and flexible small bus services, then we can run those in many cases on biofuels. And of course, it's not as though gasoline and diesel are going away overnight. We will still have reducing supplies of those fuels as time goes on. But we just have to ration them. That's the main thing. And that's something at the national level we need, at some point we will need fuel rationing. And that's something that only can be done at the national level, possibly at the state level, but probably not at the local level.
People really have to feel like I'm not the only one who has to sacrifice here. I think that's why the rationing has to happen at a higher level, where we feel like, well, we're all suffering equally, like you're doing.
And rationing will happen one way or another. Price is a form of rationing, But it's a very inefficient form of rationing because what you do is, beyond a certain point, you price large segments of society just out of the equation, and that could include farmers. It could include lots and lots of workers who can't get to and from their jobs. And we can't afford to have that happen, so we need a more rational system of rationing than price alone will give us.
Yeah, you were just mentioning the farmers. I was reading just right after Rita and Katrina, the farmers just really feeling squeezed, and I was trying to figure out why. I mean, certainly the prices are up for the natural gas, and I understand that like half of our fertilizer plants are overseas, so it's going to be more expensive to bring the fertilizer here. But the other thing that one farmer in Texas at least had mentioned was that the commodity prices are down. So they're squeezed both ways, because I thought, if it's just more expensive, then we will just pay more. But they're not being offered prices for and they're talking about not growing. And it's like, I'm thinking, whatever food security we might have, I don't know what our storage capacity is. We used to be able to have enough food in storage to feed the world for months, weeks, whatever it is. That's not...
Globally, food storage is way down, and we've been eating into our food stores, grain stores, for many years now. Actually,
really?
Per capita grain consumption has been on the decline for quite a number of years. But on top of that, then we have this short-term problem here in the U.S. with, as you mentioned, fuel prices and fertilizer prices, and a lot of farmers are just agonizing right now over whether they can afford to plant next year's crop. It's really a huge problem, and as you say, the price mechanism is not working for us in this situation because the farmers are not able to raise their prices. We just don't have a system that allows for that. The food system is dominated not by individual producers, but by the huge agribusiness cartels, the middlemen like Archer Daniels Midland, companies like that, ConAgra. Actually, similar things are going to be true in other industries where short-term price spikes for fuel will hit industries hard, and it'll be very difficult for them to pass along costs to consumers. The airline industry is another example of that. 40% of their revenues have to go out to pay for jet fuel. And sooner or later, of course, higher fuel prices will filter down to the general public, the ticket buyers, but the airline companies hold off on doing that because they know if they raise their rates substantially, that will kill demand for their service. And yet if they don't, then they go bankrupt because they can't pay their fuel bills. So
they're really catch-22 here.
They're caught.
About scale. I mean, the thing that I can think about is the scale of things is what feels daunting when you look at that whole picture. When I think about, talking about it, if we move away from that agribusiness because it's not cost effective, and move towards organic methods or methods not using the petroleum fertilizers, you're looking at it a wholly different scale.
We have to reorganize the entire food system of the country. Basically, we have. I mentioned the big agribusiness cartels. They are unless we change those, the whole system is going to be extremely vulnerable. We have to get those big middlemen out of the picture, and that means encouraging local production for local consumption, dealing directly with farmers by way of CSAs or farmers markets. That's the only way we're going to keep our farmers in business. And it's also the only way we're going to be able to afford to eat beyond a certain point because the transportation costs for food are going to skyrocket as well. We'll have the problem of trucking food for hundreds and thousands of miles, which we've been accustomed to. Now, even a lot of food is flown in from South America and other countries, and of course that's if you look at the efficiency, the fuel efficiency or the energy efficiency of food transportation by water, by air, by rail, by truck, clearly air transportation it's about 30 times. More costly in terms of energy than transportation by water, for example. So if we can move as much food as possible along the Mississippi River or by water around the coasts, and then otherwise basically just eat as local as we can. You mentioned local energy producers. This is something I haven't even talked about, but that of course that's extremely important. Local energy farms is an idea I think that is worth pursuing. So that sometimes energy production requires space, and it requires space outside of urban areas. Who's in charge of those spaces? Well, usually farmers.
Right. Yes.
So this is one other way of keeping our farmers in business and giving them another source of income while they then are able to help supply the community with its needs.
Certainly in Nevada County, we have the far east of our county is a very different geography, different landscape than here in the west, the lower foothills, middle foothills. And so people are talking about the potential for wind farms up in Truckee, and of course solar. There could be some fabulous energy generation up in the uplands there, the mountains.
Right, and also to a small extent growing fuel crops. Although I prefer to put less emphasis on that, because I think if we're facing a problem of maintaining food supply anyway, then to add the burden of also growing crops to growing food for people locally, I think may be too much. So biofuels, I think we have to reserve again for emergency vehicles and absolutely necessary farm equipment and so on.
As I read your books, both of them, I kept thinking the thought, surely the corporate system that we have would be horrendously crippled, is going to be horrendously crippled by this. Surely they must have plans maybe it's a form of denial, but it's like I can't imagine that the whole edifice of our interlocked corporate world, you see it on Wall Street, could be not planning for all of this.
I know, it's amazing. And, I've been traveling around for many months and talking to people in different industries and people in corporations, not only in the U.S., but in other countries around the world. And I have to say, I don't think they do have a plan B. And I think that's true even of really major companies like Ford and Boeing and the oil companies. It's an interesting situation where most of the policymakers, not just in this country but around the world, tend to have an education in business and economics or law. And if they're in government, it's more likely that they have a law degree, and if they're in business, it's more likely that they have a business or economics degree. And economics and law are two fields of study that don't prepare us very well for understanding the physical world.
Yeah, they're both worlds of mental constructs, largely.
Exactly. And so we have a situation where standard economic theory, market fundamentalism, tells us that really the market will take care of any problem, certainly with resources or shortages of resources. That's what the market's here for. That's what it's designed to do. So the idea that we could have a shortage of a resource like oil that would be a fundamental challenge to the survival of our society, that just doesn't compute for people with an education in standard economic theory.
It's outside the system. I mean, it's almost like it's on a different level.
Right. So even in industries like the oil companies, where they employ hundreds of very highly trained engineers and geologists who understand the problem perfectly, the decisions for those companies are being made by people in the front office who don't have degrees in geology, but who have degrees in business and economics. And so you'll find it in companies like ExxonMobil and Shell and Texaco and so on. The people who are making the long range decisions only rely on the expertise of their engineers and geologists in certain situations. They don't rely on them for the sort of the big picture analysis, but they get specific numbers from them, and then they plug them into their economic models and then run with that. And so you can imagine what happens in a company like Boeing or General Motors. For them, the idea of global oil production peak is you might as well be talking about messages from Mars.
It's almost, as you were speaking, making me think that in a way they're managing their message to, well, there's certainly their shareholders and the community. In a sense. It's almost like a marketing decision,
And they're
not the physical
thinking,
universe.
They're thinking ahead to the next quarter, next quarterly profit, and most of the people who are making decisions are in their late 50s or 60s, and they're nearing retirement, so they're not thinking 20 years or 50 years ahead. They're thinking 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead.
Well, I think it was you who pointed out we've got they who are thinking the next quarter and our politicians who are thinking the next election.
That's right.
And so we've got this epidemic of only short-term thinking.
Yeah.
And that's true all the way down to the municipality level when our elected officials are only in for 2 years.
And the assumption is that when the shortage arises, the price goes up, and that'll fix everything. That's why I think it's so important to be using the Hirsch report that came out this February from Science Applications International Corporation. That report is written by people in the policy world for policymakers in the language they understand. And it undercuts that economistic argument that the market will take care of it. It says, we need 20 years of preparation before the peak happens. Price signals will not give us nearly enough warning. So that is the piece of information that needs to go out to policymakers. So when we're talking to city officials, county officials, state officials, national officials, we need to be leading with the Hirsch report. That is the most important piece of information we have right now, I think. Also, not politicizing this too much, because we're all going to be in this together. And if it becomes politicized left, right, Democrat, Republican, then it'll just be an endless battle, and we'll all go down the tubes together. I hate to see that happen. I had a long conversation. I was driven from Yellow Springs, Ohio, to Frederick, Maryland, by a man who works for Roscoe Bartlett, who's the representative from Maryland, who is a Republican and yet who's speaking out very strongly on the floor of Congress about peak oil. John Darnell, who's his main advisor on energy issues, John Darnell is not a Republican. In fact, he is a pacifist Quaker, and he went to work for John Darnell went to work for Roscoe Bartlett at Bartlett's invitation, and was very, very cautious in accepting that invitation because his political views on most issues are very much at variance with Roscoe Bartlett's views. And John Darnell is a very principled individual. So, but he realized that peak oil is such an important issue that if Roscoe Bartlett was going to speak out about it, that he was willing to support Roscoe Bartlett on that and work for him. And I think that's a helpful example to take. Not that we should surrender, all those of us who hold particular political views, not that we should surrender our principles and just go with the other side on every issue. Certainly not. But on this particular issue, I think we have to see where the leadership is and support it wherever it is, and try to educate those who aren't taking leadership on this issue and get them to, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Greens, socialists, libertarians, whatever.
Perhaps because this is an issue that grabbed me, as it obviously has grabbed you, I found myself thinking, there are other important issues in the world, but how can we even... the reduction in oil and gas is going to affect everything else. Everything else. The volunteers who can come work with your organization, or the folks coming to church. I mean, it's going to affect all the institutions in our culture, from the family right on out.
That's right.
That it's too late for. I mean, this issue. It's too late for flags. For sides, for division, for labels.
Right.
Or at least it surely calls for that.
Yeah. Well, of course, there is a certain built-in division between what we've been calling cornucopians, or late peakers, people who believe that this is not a problem, that global oil production peak won't happen for decades, or maybe they believe in abiotic oil or something like that.
Okay.
So there certainly is controversy, and there isn't sort of inherent division, but hopefully that can be settled. That conversation can be settled by the facts and by better data, and rather than by political argument. But I think the Hirsch report, the implications of the Hirsch report, particularly the first 40 pages of the report, are really clear. That we need 20 years to prepare for peak oil, and the cost of preparing too early will be far overshadowed by the cost of preparing too late. So even if the optimists are right, even if global oil production isn't going to peak till 2035, we should be starting right now with the World War II level and scale of effort to prepare for it. So I don't. After the Hirsch report, I don't think there's any room left for complacency, no matter which set of numbers you're using.